Hi, my name is Ayomide. Welcome to the World Without People podcast, where we journey into some pretty amazing stories of everyday people. I believe strongly in the interconnectedness of our human experience, that we can color and enrich our lives by sharing and learning from our lived experiences. In this concise 30 minutes podcast, I bring to you engaging conversations like a chapter in a vibrant book designed to motivate and encourage and challenge and, of course, brighten your day. My guests also get to ask me one question, and there's no telling what they might come up with. So thank you for tuning in. Grab your coffee or tea or listen on the go to some amazing stories of real people. After all, what is a world without people? I am so excited for you to be here today. Welcome everyone to another episode of the World Without People podcast. I have an amazing guest, Dr. Bolanle Akinronbi. Dr. Bolanle is a physician trained in the comprehensive treatment of mind-brain disorders, so an actual medical doctor. And she's the chief medical officer and founder of BrightMindsMD, a private psychiatry practice in New Jersey, where together with her team, she offers a unique and whole person approach to treatment. Dr. Bolanle is also the dancing doc, that's what we call her, and she's very much about living a meaningful life and the foundation that is laid in our minds, beliefs, habits, and relationships. And she shares this message and tools via writing, speaking, and consultation. Welcome, Dr. Bolanle. I'm so excited that you agreed to join me.
Thank you so very much. I'm excited to be here. Let's chat.
Good. Okay, so what happened today that you're grateful for?
As of today, I'm glad that my throat is not hurting as much as it was yesterday, and I'm not like breaking out in chills. I'm recovering from something, so I'm glad I'm able to talk. I was able to talk as much yesterday.
And I'm so grateful that you still made this commitment.
I came out of bed. I'm going to go right back into bed after this.
That's awesome. All right, so let's just get into it because I do have a few questions. I'm going to start with something that I just recently heard, which is that we struggle with naming our human experiences or emotions accurately. Would you agree with that?
I'd say a lot of people struggle with that, identifying the emotions and also naming them. Yes. Not everyone, I mean, we know what we feel, but not everybody's aware. And not everyone has the skill set to actually identify and like put a name on what they're feeling.
So you can feel it, but not be able to name it. But isn't the struggle of not being able to name it mean that we can't accurately treat it?
Not even just treatment, but to identify it, period, and know that I'm feeling something. Because to begin to address any kind of emotions, we at least need to be able to identify it. Even if we cannot put a name to it, at least we need to identify it. I think the identification comes first. So once we identify, then maybe we can find words to describe it, to name it.
And is there a way to do that? I mean, because obviously a lot of people won't just immediately know I'm feeling something and go to the therapist. So how do we quickly identify?
Awareness, I guess I would say, would be the initial thing. Not everyone is in touch with their emotions, especially in our cultures where we're taught to suck it up and not feel, don't cry, don't make a sound, don't let them see you cry and all that. So I think it's more and more we start to at least allow ourselves to acknowledge that we have feelings, then we can lean into identifying it. And so some people are naturally more in tune with their emotions. Those people probably at least are able to identify it. For people who are not, that's maybe therapy can be a way to learn about yourself and have space made to acknowledge and identify and name your feelings.
You just said now that, especially as, say, Africans, for example, we don't tend to acknowledge our feelings, but there's maybe your religion does not necessarily accommodate for that or hasn't really talked enough about the need for therapy. So how do we say, hey, I need something and I need to go and find it, but finding the right person that helps you navigate that? Because I struggle with the fact that I'm like, I don't think many people can understand what I'm going through in therapy.
I would say that that's a belief that may not necessarily be true, that someone may not be able to understand what you're going through, because, I mean, there's like billions of people on Earth and literally there's nothing new under the sun. And so there's hardly any experience we've had that there isn't someone out there who may have had it before or may not be able to identify it. But even then, if someone has not been through a particular experience, part of the training of therapists is to be able to hear you out and reflect to you. Like, people deliver children every day who have never had children. So the training is what prepares therapists out there to be able to help a person, even if it's an experience they've not been able to go through themselves. However, I would say even still, when people are finding therapists, I always joke and say that finding a therapist is like dating. You may have to kiss a few frogs before you find the right one. And when I say frogs, I don't mean that the actual person is a frog, but like it might take meeting a few people to find the right fit. If, for example, have met people who are looking for so maybe they're Christians, for example, they want to meet a therapist who has their Christian or their specific faith background to be able to relate to them at that level. Like, there's a certain shared experience that they can inform with in terms of the therapeutic process. So there's value to that. But even if you don't find someone who has a shared experience, I would say in general, well-trained therapists are able to meet you where you are, even if not wholesomely, but at least, partly.
And I like that. I think sometimes when we all here just go to therapy, that therapist, like you said, may not even be able to hit all those parts. What would you say is a alternative? So do you then back that up with another therapist? Do you back that up with prayer? Do you back it up with...
So with therapy, yeah, a lot of people do some work. Therapy is a continuous process. It's a continuous growth process. And actually what a lot of people do is you'll get to a point in therapy where the therapist would be like, we've gone as far as we can go together, then you might be able to work with someone else on other things. There are also different types of therapies. I don't think this is stressed enough. When people talk about therapy, they talk a lot, in fact, the vast majority out there is supportive therapists, where that's just a kind of therapy where someone is holding your hand through a difficult situation. That's probably the most common out there. If you go into that kind of therapy, you're not really going to be working on deep issues, childhood backgrounds, and things like that. So that's not what that kind of therapy is for. That's supportive therapy is just to hold your hand through a hard time. But if you're looking to do deep work, look into your childhood, look into why am I the way I am? So the classic psychodynamic therapies or psychoanalysis, but that's a specific kind of therapy as well, where you're looking into where we've come from. How did I get here? What's my way forward? There's also cognitive therapy that's very manualized, targeted therapy to change your thoughts, behaviors, and actions about a specific things. That's what you might use in an anxious person. For OCDs, there's exposure prevention therapy. So when we talk about therapies, I want to say that people should not just be like, oh, therapist, pick that one. I like what they look like. You should really first decide, why am I going to therapy? And so then you should match that with the skill set or the specific therapeutic approach of the therapist you're going to meet. Because many times I was like, I just went to therapy. I talked and nothing. And I'm like, that's because you're going to do supportive therapy. Supportive therapy is supporting you through hard times.
Yeah.
You're not really doing deep work. You're not examining a whole lot. They're just supporting you. They're holding your hands. That's what you went there for. If you wanted to do something different, then you need to be exploring a different kind of therapist or therapy tool set.
No, I think that's vital because, like you said, if most people hear therapy, all they think about is talk therapy. And I always tell people, that person might not be meeting your needs. Then there's also the fact that you might actually even need meds and that person cannot do that for you. So you're also still limiting
what you need. Exactly. Right. So I am a psychiatrist. My training is a combination of the bio stuff, which is medication management, plus therapeutic approaches. All psychiatrists, at least in the United States, are required to have some basic trainings in different kinds of the common types of therapies. So most psychiatrists can provide, although don't always do, but most psychiatrists have training in addition to being able to prescribe medications. I have a lot of patients who see me primarily for their medication management, and they see a therapist for the therapeutic piece. And sometimes, depending on where a person is in their journey, they may need medicines to support what's going on. Not everybody needs medications. I want to highlight that. When we talk about mental health, for example, mental health is something that applies to everyone, every single person, because it's a piece of our health, our psychosocial, emotional well-being. Everyone has mental health, but not everyone has a mental illness. I like to make that distinction as well. So if you are someone, say maybe who's had some experiences or trying to understand yourself better, you will be taking care of your mental health by going to explore yourself in therapy. That doesn't typically require medications. That's just exploring, self-exploration, understanding oneself better, figuring out the way forward. That's you taking care of your mental health. And that applies to everybody. However, some people will have a mental illness diagnosis as part of their discovery process, maybe depression, maybe anxiety. That part will then need medicines to address. And so many times those kinds of people will have a combination approach in their treatment.
I love it. Mental health versus mental illness. And I think that's important to highlight because I don't think a lot of people understand that difference. For the purposes of this conversation, we're really focusing on mental health. And I'm curious because I think that a lot of talk about self-care has been going on. But in my opinion, could self-care really be avoidance for some people?
Absolutely. Self-care is good, but yes, with the whole faddism that's come together with self-care, everyone's trying to be flued out and live large and do the soft life. And we're distracting. Sometimes it's a distraction. It prevents people from looking at what the issue is or where they are or what problems are. I absolutely agree with you. Sometimes people use it as a distraction.
Yeah, and I saw this quote. It says, you can never fake your growth. Your triggers always expose you. And so my question for you is, how do we recognize those hidden traumas? How do we ask ourselves, what's behind that anger that I just displayed that's normally not me? Or that situation happened and all of a sudden I'm feeling this way. And I know there's a certain level of awareness, but sometimes some things are really hidden. Like you talked about like childhood traumas, and you've never had a reason to kind of be confronted with it throughout your adult age until you have this particular experience. You recognize that it was maybe from that and deal with it immediately.
Yeah, on a surface level, that's what therapy is for. That's what you do therapy for. But I'll tell you my own personal trigger. Like, anytime my child comes home and tells me somebody like near bullied them or said something mean to them, I fly into like this big rage, and I have to catch myself like, I'm so angry. Say, child, there was another 6 or 7 year old, and you're so mad. And the reason is simple. Is that I experienced that bullying when I was young. So like if my daughter like says anything that smells like bullying or someone not being nice to them, this is not, because my anger is beyond like normal mom protection feelings. This is me re-experiencing like, oh, let's go get them. I'm like, hey, chill out. You want to go get a 7-year-old? That sounds a little wacky. And it's something I'm actually still working on. I can't even say I'm healed from. So when you're finding yourself having reactions that are really out of proportion to what's on ground, it's time to start asking your questions. Self-reflection is a really good way to become self-aware. It's like, okay, to really be asking yourself the hard questions. Why am I reacting this way? What's behind it? Is this really what I'm upset about? That's on the self-reflection piece. But really part of the work of going to therapy is to have someone dig at you, because I will tell you that many times I talk to people and they don't even know that they had trauma, because trauma is normalized, especially like in many cultures, but I will call out the Niger culture because that's the one I'm very familiar with. Trauma is normalized to a largest extent. But like, oh yeah, they beat me with like and I'm good. It made me good. Like, no, you're battered, but you're surviving despite that. You're not surviving because of it. You could have survived just nice without it. So, but we glorify traumatic experience so much so that we don't even realize that it was traumatic to us. So it takes someone sitting down and be like, really, let's look at this. Let's talk about this. Like, that was traumatic. It's traumatic, but we glorify it. We're like, yeah, I toughed that out. Look how great I turned out. And then we visit it on people coming behind us. We turn it into generation after generation of trauma. So where was I going with that, man? Sometimes even with our best efforts, we may not be able to pick out where it's coming from or what's triggering us in the moment, because we were not even aware that the thing happened to us. That's where I was going with my little rant about glorifying trauma, like, because we don't even realize that that thing was traumatic to us and it may be triggering to us again. So we may not even be able to make the connection on our own. Mm-hmm. So if you're someone who's able to make the connection on your own while you're sitting and reflecting, great. But if you're not, sitting down in therapy might be a great way to do it. I'll give you another personal experience. My parents moved to the US when I was in high school. I was in JSS 2 or 3. And so I lived without my parents for about 5 years before I came to join them in the US. And when I first went to therapy here for a different reason, we started to talk about that. I remember then that I would cry. I went from being like a very bubbly child. I was a very tough, strong child. I was in boarding school. Nothing phases me. I remember I cried every day. Even my very good friend who lives here, like when we talk about it, like I just became this cry. I cried all the time. And people were like, what's wrong with you? I don't know. I don't know why I'm crying. I'm just crying all the time. And I became like a very cry. I was just crying. It was bizarre. I was crying for no reason. Nothing was making me sad. I was not unhappy about anything. I just cried all the time. It was not me. It wasn't until I was in therapy here, that's when I was like, you experienced an abandonment. And I was like, yeah, what? Nobody abandoned me. I knew where my parents were going. They told me where they were going. I knew the reason they were going, and they were going there to make us a better life. Nobody abandoned me. And he was like, yeah, cognitively, you knew that you weren't being abandoned. But as a young child, as a teenager who's used to having their parents all their lives, you woke up one day and your parents are in some country that you've never been before. You didn't know when they were coming back. And you had to start fending for yourself as a child. Emotionally, it felt like an abandonment. They didn't abandon you, but you experienced that as abandonment. And it clicked for me. It makes sense. So again, saying this to just a point that you may not even recognize your own trauma until you've had an opportunity to sit with someone to play it back for you. You're like, I get it.
I think that's important. I tell people that I studied psychology because I wanted to have my own therapy. So as I was studying, I'm serious, as I was studying books, learning in classrooms, I'm like, oh, I recognize that. I see that. So I always tell people, when people are like, oh, they don't know what to study in school, just go to psychology. You'll figure it out. Thank you for sharing your own personal story as well. Which brings me to my next question, actually. Why do we struggle so much with vulnerability?
I think it's cultural. I think most of our cultures are stoic. In our culture, we're trained to tough it up. Don't let anybody see you cry. I'll give you something to cry about if you start crying. So I would say that it's a cultural experience to not fall apart, to be tough. And we get so tough that we see any kind of show of vulnerability as unacceptable, as weakness. And we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable.
But even with all the exposure?
Well, we can have exposure, but we're not far away from our upbringing. The foundations of who we are laid as children culturally. So yes, as people become more exposed, if they're open-minded, they might be open to it. But at our core, we're still who we are. And it takes some real self-convincing to say, it's okay to be vulnerable. We know better now. We can do better. But it's still, telling ourselves to do that is still challenging the core of who we are. The core of who we are is don't let anybody see you sweat. Be tough. Don't let anybody see you cry. So even when you allow yourself to cry, you're still getting that, people can see you crying.
And would you say maybe that's the biggest hindrance to change what people think of us?
I don't know if it's the biggest hindrance to change, but I know it's a huge part of our cultures that we need to let go. Being overly concerned with the community and what they think of us and how people may look at us. I don't know if it's the biggest, but I would definitely agree that it's a hindrance to change, because then you're not even going to be true to yourself if all you are worried about is how you're going to be perceived, how people are going to see you, what they think of you. It limits us from being our full true self.
And in your experience, what's the biggest hindrance to change?
I think it's the work that it takes to change. Change is work. For me, I say change is work. So unless one is really committed, it's hard to change. You walk, you drive, you're not really thinking about where you're going. So changing from that route to something different requires work. It requires you actually being aware, putting steps in, forming a new habit. It's work. And so I would say that the biggest challenge to it is the work that's involved in changing. It's hard to change.
And I think I can personally attest to that, because it was last year I called Dr. Bolanle and I'm like, doc, what am I doing? I think I saw a post that you have put up and I'm like, okay, wait, I have her number. Like, why haven't I even just called her? And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do with my life. And I was just all of this stuff. And she's like, okay, first of all, I'm going to need you to calm down and then change. And I will say that it was part of that conversation that has birthed this podcast. So thank you.
Yay! I'm proud you're doing it.
But it brings me to my next question. So in the past, I held the biggest imposter syndrome. And I've been to school, I've done so much, like everybody else is like, oh, you're so great. And I'm like, yeah, but like, I think it's all fake. Why do we question our competence?
Why do we question our own competence? I don't think it's unique to you to question your own competence. I think a lot of people that are trying to do things outside of our comfort zones, we question it. And it's a sign that you're doing something outside of your comfort zone. Like, am I sure? Am I okay? Am I really legit doing this? But it takes courage and bravery to do it despite feeling that way, I'd say. But why? I don't know why. I have to think about that a little bit.
I love the honesty. I love it because a lot of people will come here trying to give an answer to a problem that they don't know. And I love that.
I was just thinking out loud too. I'm wondering for us culturally, the whole concept of the humility, don't be seen. I'm thinking about it like if it has anything to do with that too for us culturally. But I know that the imposter syndrome is a universal experience, but I'm thinking locally for us in the Nigerian community, a lot of our upbringing, at least in our generation, was don't brag, be humble, be down. I don't know if that has any correlation with then when you're doing something that you consider important, not feeling comfortable standing in it.
I think it's a tricky thing. I agree with you. It's a tricky thing because it was even my dad I was talking to and he was like, yeah, you're supposed to be proud about what you do. And I'm like, but there's a difference between me going to say, this is what I've done. And
better
really
than you.
Exactly. Like you don't know all the things I've done versus just knowing that, okay, I did a good job. Like that's something that anybody else could have done, but in my opportunity to do it, did a good job. And it's something that I'm getting better at.
Work in progress. Yes.
All right. How do we acknowledge that the work that we say is fueled by passion is also fueled by our fears and insecurities? So, for example, you have this job that you're passionate about and you feel like you're good at it, but you are also extra working hard because of that fear or insecurity, like, oh, I could lose my job, or I'm not good enough, or I'll be found out. It's the fear and the insecurity that is actually pushing you to kind of do a better job than it is your passion.
Passion. I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. But like people don't acknowledge that. Like they don't actually acknowledge the fact that, I'll speak from my personal experience. Like I'm given a role and I'm like, okay, now you're giving me titles, and with titles comes responsibility. It means I gotta work. Like it means like I can't be caught on fresh. I'm passionate about the role, don't get me wrong. I know deep within that it's that fear and that insecurity of not being found, not being seen, to not have actually earned the role that is pushing it.
So coming down again to that imposter, if I make a misstep, they're going to know I'm faking. So I better like be on top of my game. I'm developing a different relationship with fear a little bit because I'm thinking that we need some fear to get going, to light a fire under us. Or maybe fear is not the word, but some level of discomfort to light a fire under us and keep us going. I would say even that women in powerful roles experience that more than men. And I think that some of that is a message in that the woman cannot do it or might not be good enough, or you didn't earn this role. I think it's dangerous because then you're performing for the audience. Yeah, you're passionate about the role, but if the main driver for you or for anybody is not getting caught, then it feels like being on a hamster wheel and just running. And it may take the joy out of the job, even though you would have done the job well. But now that you're doing it as a form of performance to the observer or the imaginary observer, because most of the time, these people who are judging us are in our minds, us judging ourselves, I think it squeezes the joy and the passion out of the work. I would definitely say that's something that needs to be brought into the sun in therapy or in self-reflection to understand, why am I feeling like I need to be performing? And it prevents us also from doing this job, bringing our own unique selves into the role. Like one of my favorite public executives is, I don't know if you have Bozoma Saint John. I love the authenticity and her own unique angle that she brings to her work. When she comes to work, she comes as a tall, very dark-skinned, beautiful, imposing Ghanaian American woman. She doesn't try to be like Johnny or Mr. Whoever out there, or try to do her work, or at least the way she presents in the public sphere. She doesn't try to do it the way cookie cutter that people might expect this work to be done. She brings herself, her own unique angle, her own unique self to that role. I'm sure it must have taken her years of growing into her big exec roles, but I admire her a lot in when she talks about how she approaches a job. She brings her own specialness, because a lot of the jobs and things we do, there are basics to it that everyone can do. But by bringing our authentic self into it, we're able to just put our own special spin that the world would not have been able to experience or enjoy if we hadn't done that. And I feel like the danger of doing work out of an imposter syndrome is you're going to be following a guideline that's we've imagined, that this is how a leader is supposed to be. This is how this person in this role is supposed to be, in a very cookie cutter way. So you're ticking boxes based on someone else's idea of what it should be, versus just bringing your own real unique talents, unique angle, fabulous hair into that role.
No, and I think that's so correct. I think that was what therapy helped me with. We'll confess that, because I think, again, it stemmed from that imposter syndrome. But I can't not be myself. That's the one grace that I feel like I have. It eventually is going to come out. So thankfully, therapy was able to help me say, hey, own it. That's who you are. Own it and go with it. And I think my last question from here, and I think it's also just kind of related to that, is a lot of us are dealing with wounds from past relationships, even past professional disappointments. How do we not carry that? I know therapy, but what I mean by that is, I think that we end up carrying each one added onto the other, and we start to live bitter. We start to end up living very shielded and guarded and all of that. And I know therapy is the best way to deal with that. But not everybody's going to. First of all, let's acknowledge the fact that there's not enough therapists. Yes, there's not enough therapists. Yes, thank you. There's not enough therapists, especially in Africa, especially in Nigeria. And until we fix that, right, there are a lot of people who cannot get a therapist. So I'm hoping whatever you say, whatever little you can say, can then, if they hear it anytime from now, can help them.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we carry injuries and wounds and traumas from one place to the next, and it ends up affecting how we carry out our next jobs or relationships. So the word for that, I would say, would be healing from it. If you've been wounded, to then acknowledge your wounds, cry about it, lick it, and allow yourself to heal. Before, usually, especially in relationships, that's like the big reason to say, if you're coming out of a hurt relationship, wait a little bit before going into another one so you can allow yourself to heal from it. Then there is the awareness of how you were hurt. If we can think about, how was I hurt in this place, and not make it about us, because I think that one of the mistakes we make is we then transfer like whatever pain or hurt we've had with one type of person to everybody else that we come across. And then we treat them as though they were the job or the partner that wasn't kind to us. So reminding ourselves that each job, each person is an individual. And even if one person hurt us, it doesn't mean that everyone else in our path is going to hurt us in that way. And to mindfully allow ourselves to give each person a clean slate to show us who they are. And there are a lot of, I think, self-help books. Even if we don't have access to therapists, there are self-help books that people can look into and read, or even podcasts and programs like this that address healing. I think that when we take the time to heal from any wounds and injuries that we have, whether at a job or relationship, it allows us to not then spatter the blood on the next set of people we come in contact with.
I love it. I love it. And Dr. Bolanle, before I forget, where can people find you?
Sure, thank you. I can be found on TikTok and Instagram as Dr._Bolanle. That's Dr._BOLANLE, as well as Facebook, and BrightMindsMD.com for people who want appointments.
Perfect. Please follow Dr. Bolanle. And I forgot to say, she does share a lot of videos on TikTok and Instagram, which have been very helpful for me. I've been following the one on sleep because, as you can see, the bags on my eyes. Yes, I need to figure out my sleep thing. Hey, I mean, this has been very, very insightful for me. So thank you so very much. This has been short but sweet. And you have one question.
I get to ask you one question.
Yes.
Okay. What do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Honestly, I'll be very honest. I haven't been doing a lot for fun lately. But in general, what I like to do is dance. I love dancing. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
So I'll dance in my house. I don't need an audience.
Nice.
That's part of the New Year goals. Do other things for fun. Oh, wait. I also love traveling.
Yes. Have you traveled recently? I know COVID shut down all the travel plans.
Oh my gosh.
The outside is open now, right?
Oh no, I traveled a lot during COVID. I traveled to Nigeria several times. I traveled Cayman Islands. Yeah, no, London. Yeah, that's my other fun thing.
Nice. Good for you. Because we do need to have fun in addition to all of this work.
Thank you so much. What a great book you read. Please don't forget to share this if you enjoyed it. Connect on IG and Twitter at TWWPcast. And get details on the website at worldwithoutpeople.org. And hey, remember to make loving others the story of your life. Until next time, this is The World Without People.